See, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm beginning to see the flaw in wearing the same shirt in all of these because when I sort through the footage to see which video clip goes to which video, I'm not going to be able to tell based on what I'm wearing. Welcome back to the bookcase. Last time I talked about The Well of Ascension and how that book was a whole lot better than I remember it being. This is sort of an extension of that discussion because I largely had the same thoughts about Book 3, The Hero of Ages. To summarize, I was not pleased that Book 1 effectively ended by changing everything about the setting, because I felt there was a lot of potential yet to be tapped in that setting. To that extent, a portion of my frustration with Book 2 in this trilogy, although not all of it, was due to myself being a bit unfair with the book, refusing to engage with it on its own terms. After being pleasantly surprised by The Well of Ascension, I was looking forward to reading through The Hero of Ages, and went at it enthusiastically. So now here we are at the conclusion of the original Mistborn trilogy. Let's find out if I find this conclusion to be any more satisfying than I did when I was back in high school. When we left off our characters in the last book, Vin had gone to the Well of Ascension and released the power there, instead of taking it for herself. After some prompt intervention from the entity they have come to know as the Mist Spirit, Vin is able to save her injured spouse, Elend, by making him Mistborn himself. But now, despite their victories over the armies besieging Luthadel, a foreboding uncertainty hangs over our protagonists. With the ashfalls and the mists growing worse and worse with every passing day, and the planet becoming less and less livable, Vin and her friends must try to navigate their unwieldy nation to combat the end of the world itself. That's a lofty task, but they have one big lead. The storage cache where they found the Well of Ascension has information in it pointing to other storage caches in other cities. Massive caves full of food, water, and information left by the late Lord Ruler about the threat they're facing. That threat is the entity known only as Ruin. They hope that in one of these caches they may also find the Lord Ruler's Atium stash. The Lord Ruler's treasury of Atium is yet to be discovered. Now, this isn't really a huge priority for others. See, Atium is wealth, but the problem is you can't really say the economy is in shambles, because to say that, there'd have to be an economy. Despite this, Vin is convinced that the Atium has some role to play in what's to come. This story's all about those end-of-the-world vibes. It does well to set the tone. Things are falling apart, and they're getting worse and worse all the time. Our characters are in a race to find a way to stop something they don't understand from wreaking havoc on a massive scale that they can barely comprehend. As for our main characters this time around, we've still got Vin and Elend. Sazed is off in one space having a crisis of faith. Tensoon, our Kandra friend from the last book, is just having a bad time in general, and Lestibornis is trying to speedrun Kelsier's story from the first book. Now, Vin largely doesn't feel like she has a lot of room to grow in this story, and I don't really think that's a bad thing. As of her arc in the last story, she's kind of complete as a character. She's finished cooking. Vin feels like she's fully formed at this point to me. As of her arc concluding in the previous book, she's basically finished the growth that she needed to become sort of that complete person that needs to accomplish what happens. As far as our trilogy goes, we're in Act 3, and Vin is her Act 3 self. At this point, her growth in this story is less about how she grows and more about what she knows. That knowledge comes in the shape of big, world-shaking revelations. The story's all about this final version of Vin going up against the big threat that is Ruin, that is the end of the world. As for Elend, this is a little weird because Elend kind of feels a bit different as a character since he's become a Mistborn. Some people think that this makes Elend worse as a character, and I disagree. I do think that a more interesting direction could have been gone if Elend had not become Mistborn. Now, that is not the same thing as saying I think that him becoming a Mistborn makes him a bad character, just that that is not the direction I would have chosen to take it if I wanted to take that character where I thought would be interesting. I think what's going on here is that The Hero of Ages is a war book. There's this warrior general shaped hole in the narrative for someone who can do Mistborn things. And our choices here, from the author perspective, are to introduce a new character to be another Mistborn, or to add those abilities to an existing character. The solution Sanderson went for here was to give those powers to Elend, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I think what gets most people on this, myself included, is that there's not really any thematic connotation for why Elend has received these powers. There is a narrative reason that makes sense, but there's no thematic build-up to Elend receiving powers. Now, I want to say we're not talking about whether or not Elend or any other character deserves to have powers. It's just that Elend getting it just feels kind of random. Maybe it has something to do with his leadership arc where he's learning to lead and be in charge, but I feel like I'm grasping at straws here. Now, this does not ruin the character. He's still Elend. The story just needs him to be leading this war. Now, to that effect, I like his arc in this story. It's about learning to make hard decisions and to live with himself. He's worried about becoming like the Lord Ruler in this story. But that also gets me to what I think was kind of a weird part about this story. This book has a weird habit of playing apologist for the Lord Ruler, for Rashek. Now, I don't think this is entirely incorrect. I don't think that Rashek was an objectively evil person. But the book comes close to the Lord Ruler did nothing wrong territory sometimes, which is patently false. See, my thoughts are that good intentions should be considered, but good intentions do not erase when great harm is done. I understand where Sanderson is coming from, but Rashek, despite his intentions of trying to save the world, did a lot of harm in the process. He tried his best, I agree, to fight against a force that was trying to destroy the world. He was often terrible at it, and many of his shortcomings, I think, were just due to incompetence. But some were due to prejudice and insecurities. I think he tried his best to save the world, and he deserves some credit in that respect, but he also absolutely deserved to be toppled as a bad king / god. The problem is the book often embraces the good and overlooks the bad as necessary. This is effective for Elend's arc, however. Elend is concerned with becoming more callous. The calculus of war is weighing on him. The decisions he has to make are making him feel like he's becoming more of a monstrous person. He has become a tyrant by necessity. The world is literally ending. Elend is wrestling with those decisions, and I like how ultimately that comes to a head in this book, where Elend is forced to make a specific decision. Another thing going on is with Tensoon, the Kandra. Tensoon's trying to convince his people that the world is ending. Now, I don't want to go too much into that plot, but I will say this. I like the Kandra as a people, and I like their society. I wish we got to see more of it in this book. The Kandra are interesting because they're shapeshifters whose shape is largely determined by a skeleton. They don't have skeletons themselves, so they need a set of bones so that they can basically take on a shape. Now, when they're on contracts, usually they're taking the bones of another living human person so they can impersonate that person. But when they're in the homeland, they use something called a true body. True bodies are neat because they're basically made by Kandra artisans with different materials, stone, wood, crystal, because some people just be extra like that. And once your true body is made, you can just wear it like a set of bones. Most Kandra, when they are in the homeland, go around with translucent skin so everybody can see their true body underneath. Then you've got this interesting structure of their society because Kandra aren't born so much as they are created from the Mistwraiths out in the wild. Basically, there is a process by which a Mistwraith is made into a Kandra. They're also made in batches, you might say. So you've got the oldest Kandra, the Elders, they are the first generation. Underneath them is the second generation, and so on and so forth downward. We've just got subsequent generations going down. As with any society, the youth are a little bit rebellious, and you see things about younger Kandra who are having true bodies that just do not conform to normal human standards. You've got people with multiple arms, people who have different amounts of mouths or mouths in the wrong places, stuff like that. The society that's presented is so interesting, and I wish we weren't just meeting them in an end-of-the-world situation. This is one of those things that I'm hoping maybe in some future work gets elaborated on more. Meanwhile, I did mention Lestibornis is off having his own adventure. Is it Lestibornis or Lestiborns? See, I listened to the audio, and I just listened to Secret History, where Michael Kramer, the reader, pronounces it Lestiborns, but I'm pretty sure in the original audiobook he pronounced it Lestibornis, which I think sounds more right according to how it looks. So I'm going to say Lestibornis. Lestibornis is in the process of overthrowing a city with some help from Breeze and Sazed. Things get funky though, because after a fight that he has with some enemy allomancers, he wakes up to see that not only can he burn pewter, an allomantic metal he could not previously burn, he's also seeing Kelsier. And Kelsier is just like, spook, you gotta kill the leaders and start a revolution. For the record, if for some reason you are watching these videos without having read the books, for one, wow, dedication. Thank you for sticking around. For two, I'm so sorry, most of this probably doesn't make sense. Lestibornis' nickname is Spook. This plotline with Spook doing his whole rebellion thing and becoming a religious figure in his own right, this is probably my least favorite plotline. It's the least enjoyable to me, but I still enjoy it a good deal. It's certainly a great showcase of the machinations of our villain for this story. Ruin is an excellent villain. The way he's presented, he's this eldritch force which is just always oppressing any scene, even the ones he's not directly in. See, he's omnipresent. He can hear anything you say, he can read anything you write, and he can change what you wrote. And only your thoughts, or words etched directly onto metal, are safe from his knowing. He's also, actively destroying the world. I also like the way he's depicted. I don't really want to get into, Cosmere, Adonalsium shard stuff, but for the sake of this story, he has some human interactions, but for the most part, he's kind of depicted as this force of nature. What he wants isn't just destruction, he's got this desire to take everything in the world and to break it down into its base components and establish order in that regard. He doesn't really have much of a motive that we could comprehend. Yes, he takes joy in what he does, but the joy he's taking is more just that he's fulfilling his nature. He's not doing it because he wants to do it, he's doing it because he's meant to do it. That said, even as a villain, he doesn't have a ton of interaction with many characters. What makes him a good villain besides that, though, is we always feel his impact. He weighs down over every scene in the story. Vin has plans that she wishes she could tell Elend about, but she can't because she knows Ruin is always listening. Letters are being written, but they're unreliable because Ruin can alter the text of them, so they've got to rely on messengers. And Vin knows all of this. Everything they're doing won't matter if they can't find a way to defeat this eldritch entity which is annihilating the world as they speak. As far as this trilogy goes, he's just got very good final boss energy. I love it. Now that said, the ending of this book feels a little bit messy. I'm unsure about some things, and not in a good way. Things come together pretty quickly at the end. Sanderson's trying to tie up all of the loose ends of the story together. This feels like the most ambitious thing he had done at the time in his career. I don't think the ending is unsatisfying, but it's definitely a little bit messy in parts. Back when I talked about the Stephen Leeds books, the Legion books, I talked about what Sanderson fans call the Sanderlanche. Basically, Sanderson has this habit of backloading a whole bunch of details into his climaxes, which make his climaxes very action-packed, very crowded. But I find that sometimes in his shorter books, what that causes is this dramatic change in pace that's a little bit jarring. And I kind of felt that in this one, even though this was kind of the climax for a larger trilogy. I think maybe what's going on here is he's got all of those loose ends for an entire trilogy that need to be wrapped up, but he's doing it all just with one book, the length of the Hero of Ages. I think that's something that he's actually improved in as time has gone on in a lot of ways. I think that the climaxes in all of the Stormlight Archive books are excellent, but maybe part of that is because these Stormlight Archive books, you can see them right here, these are chonky books. The climaxes are just as long as the length of these books would suggest. So I think that that backloading feels a little less apparent in that context. So let's talk spoilers. Again, filling time. Do the la. Click on the time code below. You will be able to avoid spoilers if you go to that time code. Actually, here's something to say. There will be 2 spoiler time codes here. This is spoilers just for this book. In a second, I also want to talk a little bit about Mistborn's secret history. So if you want no spoilers for either of those, just pay attention to what I'm saying. For now, I'm not talking about secret history. I'm just talking about the ending of the Hero of Ages. So if you don't want to know what happens in the Hero of Ages, click the time code below. You'll skip right to the end of all spoilers. So I like how Sazed becomes God at the end of this book. So a disclaimer here, I never watched Game of Thrones, and I still mean to read A Song of Ice and Fire, but I haven't gotten around to it. But one of the things that I remember seeing as the fandom was imploding on itself because of the final season is a lot of people being very taken aback by the part where Peter Dinklage goes, "And who would make a better king? Who has a better story than Bram the Broken?" And everybody was like, what? I think Sazed becoming the new god, the new embodiment of both preservation and ruin, is a great ending point for his character. I feel like, and this is something I feel like I understood better after looking at Secret History, but I feel like what Sanderson was going for here is Sazed is now a person who, as a keeper, he understands the ideals of preservation. He understands what it means to keep something and to preserve it and protect it and to keep it as it is. But after he lost someone he loved dearly in the second book, and after going through this miserable, depressing funk, he understands how things end. He understands how life changes, and he's been forced to grow past that. So now, embodying both of these forces, preservation and ruin, he can become a god of this world who embodies both ideally. This is something that I feel like the book could have communicated a little bit better at times, if that's what the book was going for. Otherwise, Sazed's journey from man who talks about religions to man who is now God is a very satisfying one. In particular, I like the way how kind of having both of those powers makes him a better god than either one individually, because both of those powers are incomplete. They seem contradictory, but the power of preservation just wants to keep everything unchanging, and the power of ruin just wants to destroy everything, to break everything down. But both powers together understand there's a beauty to life as it grows and as it fades and as something new is made in its place. The world also gets fixed up, ideally. I could see someone not liking this when they first read the book if they didn't know what was coming. In the getting fixed process, the world now looks a whole lot less like some foreign fantasy world and a whole lot more just like Earth. I think it's more palatable, though, knowing what's coming in Era 2 with the alloy of law and seeing the way that the world organically progresses. Now here's the part where I bring up spoiler alert number 2. Same time code as below. I'm going to talk a little bit about Secret History. Just so you know, Secret History So we've got all of the Mistborn books over here on the shelf. Secret History is kind of intended to be read after the Bands of Mourning. At time of recording, the Bands of Mourning is the latest book in the Mistborn series. In less than 24 hours, that will no longer be true. But if you haven't read up through the Bands of Mourning yet, I would highly consider skipping, because there's some significant spoilers for that book in Secret History. Here's your last chance. You're still here? You okay? Because if you're still here, and you get spoiled and you didn't want to, it's not my fault. You legally can't be mad at me. Okay, we're doing this? Let's do this. So Secret History explains that Kelsier, after he died, was basically a ghost, and what he was up to during the second and third books. Now, Sanderson claims that this was all stuff that he knew was happening as he was writing the second and third books of the original trilogy, and I can see some people trying to call bullcrap on that, because, again, Secret History didn't come out until much, much later. I do think this is supported by the text, though. If anything, I think having read Secret History after reading The Hero of Ages, on accident, by the way, I wasn't intending to do that, I just decided to pick it up, was fortunate because it recontextualizes and explains a whole lot of the things that, honestly, I was kind of thinking about in The Hero of Ages and wondering, does that really work that way? Now, that said, I would still not recommend reading it until you've read The Bands of Mourning, but I think it adds to the air that The Hero of Ages has with everybody who's just trying their darndest to do something against Ruin, against this entity which is bigger than all of them. Even Kelsier, who doesn't have a body anymore, is doing his part in trying to make things right. In particular, there's little questions that get answered, like, preservation can't hurt anything because it wants to preserve everything as it is. So how did the Mist Spirit, Preservation, injure Elend at the end of the second book? Well, it's because Kelsier was there, and Kelsier basically grabbed his arm and made him do it, in an effort to get Vin to use the power to heal Elend and not release Ruin. Besides that, it also explains why Spook, with his whole deal with getting rid of the spike from Ruin that was letting Ruin appear to him as Kelsier and tell him to do horrible things, why the real Kelsier can speak with him a bit and say, "Spook, get up, survive, you have to save the city, Spook." Yeah, that's actually Kelsier. This isn't really a review of Secret History, but I will say I do think I understand why some people don't like it, because from a certain point of view, I think it can feel very retcon-y. But for me, especially having just reread The Hero of Ages and enjoyed it, I feel like it just made really good supplementary reading to me. We'll go ahead and end the spoiler talk there. I think part of why I didn't like this book, and part of why some people feel similarly, is because, as I said before, I didn't engage with this book on its own terms when I read it back in 2012, 13, whenever. I didn't like it because the reasons I wanted to like it weren't there. Now, I want to clarify, I don't think disliking this book makes anybody closed-minded. There are legitimate gripes to have with these books, and I don't think if someone dislikes this book, if someone hates this book, I don't necessarily think they're wrong to. I think there are things present in each installment in the trilogy that are a little weird, but I really think that it's easier to overlook those things in the first book, because book one just has such a strong hook and such an interesting setting and likable characters. Mistborn book one is kind of a perfect storm to me. Now, if you still don't like books 2 and 3, that's fine. But I recommend at least taking another look at them if you haven't looked at them in a while, and just genuinely try to engage with them on their own terms. Again, I ended up disliking these books because they weren't what I wanted them to be, and I ignored something that I ended up really enjoying. So that's it for my thoughts on this book and subsequently the original Mistborn trilogy. Hopefully this was a little bit shorter. I'm trying to streamline things in my writing and recording process. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this, leave a like, subscribe, ring the bell, whatever the bell does. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me or even if you disagree with me. Again, I don't think anybody's wrong to dislike this book. There are things to dislike about this book, but I genuinely found something that I had a really good time with. Next time will be a bit of a lightning round. I'm intending to jump into all 3 Era 2 books just at the same time. They are shorter books individually than each of the other Mistborn books, but look forward to that. At any rate, I'm Steven. This is The Bookcase. Go have fun reading something.